So good morning all. So type your yours in the chat box. See, so one question from module one that is coming every year. One question repeatedly coming every year. So that question is briefly explain the history of tribology. Briefly explain the history of tribology. So this question appeared in the year 2019 December January examination, and also even in 2020 also January. What is tribology? Explain the detailed history background of tribology, and even it is appeared in one more year. Define term tribology. Discuss the industrial importance of tribology. Okay. So I have not discussed about this history of tribology with respect to module one. So now I will take up that, so that the possibility of appearing this question is much higher. Okay. So I will just take the topic. History of tribology. See, all of you type your USN in the chat box. Those are not typed. So this topic comes under module one. Here the history. So this tribology history goes to the era of Leonardo da Vinci. So in the year 1452 to 1519, he was there. So what he did is he deducted a scientific approach to friction, and he postulated laws governing the motion of a rectangular block bearing over a flat surface. So this work remained unpublished for a long time. So due to non-availability of publishing media, it goes unpublished for a long time. So later, Guillemin and Amontons, he rediscovered the laws based on Leonardo da Vinci hypothesis. And the first one was the friction force resisting the sliding at the interface is directly proportional to the normal loads. So this was his identification out of Leonardo da Vinci's hypothesis. And the second one is the friction forces does not depend on the apparent area of contact. So these two were the findings of Amontons over Leonardo da Vinci's work. Then Charles Augustin Coulomb, he verified Amontons laws and added a third law. The friction force is independent of velocity once motion starts. So there are three laws you can have. with regard to friction. So first one is again it is postulated by Amundsen based on the discovery of Leonardo da Vinci. I mean invention of the Leonardo da Vinci. The friction force resisting the sliding at the interface is directly proportional to the normal loads. The second one is the friction force does not depend on the apparent area of contact. And the third law is the friction force is independent of velocity once motion starts. So velocity nothing to do with the friction once the motion starts. That is the finding of third law. Then after that, the great scientist Newton, he focused more on that. Anyhow, we had discussed about Newton's law of viscous forces that was discussed earlier, and we have derived an equation formula based on Newton's law of viscous force. And also, we have classified the fluid into two categories. One is a Newtonian fluid, and the other one is the non-Newtonian fluid. The fluids which obeys Newton's law of viscosity. So those kind of fluids are called Newtonian fluids, and those who doesn't obey, those fluids are called non-Newtonian fluids. Then Robert Hooke, he suggested that the use of contamination of steel shafts and bell metal bushers are preferable to wood shod with iron for wheel bearings. So Robert Hooke. What is this? Then NP Petrov. So we have seen Petrov's equation for lightly loaded general bearings in case of hydrodynamic lubrication. So he developed mathematical formulas to find out the coefficient of friction, the frictional force, frictional torque, power loss, like that. Okay. So Petrov's significant contribution is with respect to realizing the concepts of lubrication and bearing into mathematical formulation is much high. So that is with respect to lightly loaded bearing. So heavily loaded Mackey come into picture. So Petrov he made theoretical interpretations of principles of hydrodynamic lubrication. So then Tower, so he has conducted an experiment. That experiment is called Tower's experiment. So he got some findings out of that, and later that Tower experiment was effectively utilized by Reynolds. So Reynolds developed a two-dimensional as well as a three-dimensional equation for hydrodynamic lubrication later on. And the historical background. So historical background, what are the how this tribology concepts evolved from the ancient ages? We shall see that. So it goes to the year 3500 BC to 30 BC, the age of Sumerians and Egyptians. Simple bearings for kindling fire and for drilling holes with the rotary motion was developed, and the pottery wheels with the hood and stone bearings were used on those days. The axle bearings with the leather loops for rolling vehicles and wheeled vehicles were used, and the use of lubricants such as oil, grease, and in few cases water is also used as a lubricant. So oil grease on those days it was natural oils and greases. Okay. Oil means it could be derived from animal or from the plant. These kind of lubricants, those people used to use it, and building sledges for transporting heavy stones. And several Egyptian reliefs depict that the transport of huge stone blocks, so that were designed for construction of monuments. You have seen that pyramids, and were slid on tree trunks rather than rollers. So tribology concepts, it was a part of the life since the human revolution took place. and nowadays also it is more relevant. And in the year 2000 BC, during other historical epochs, mainly vegetable oils and animal fats were used as lubricants and anti-wear agents. So normally, what is the role of lubricant? Lubricant is to avoid or minimize the friction. In turn, it minimizes the wear loss. Ultimately, it means it enhances the lifespan, life of the machinery or any component. However, it is fair to assume that bitumen, oil seeping out of the ground, was used for to certain degree, and just as it was an antiquity. So, with the advent of petroleum, the lubricant took another direction, and its usage became in a big manner. So, even nowadays, lubricant industry, it is contributing to a great extent to GDP of the country also. Okay, so even if you go to the Gulf, it is the main source of their income, oil and lubricant. And even 650 BC, the earliest documents mentioning the use of wheels to reduce the friction. So first time in the year to 650 BC before Christ. So we are in AD. So even in BC also, people used to use this lubricants to minimize the friction, reduce the friction in wheels. And in 330 BC, uh, the Greek engineer Daedalus developed what was possibly one of the first rolling bearing mechanism for supporting the battering rams on warships. So this was also a development of tribology. Even the wars, so it could be World War or any other wars, it has also contributed a lot in development of the tribology. See, most of the advents or inventions happened due to the World War. We have seen that it could be an industrial revolution or any other technology innovation or invention. So it took out of need, and especially during the time of war. Okay, so that is in the 330 BC. Next, between 50 BC to 50 AD, the Romans, the remains of the rotating platform originating from a ship of Emperor Caligula, and which was found in the year 1930 at the bottom of Lake Nemi, show that rudimentary bearings have been used since ancient times. And this platform can be viewed as one of the first example of thrust bearings. So thrust bearings means which carries load along the axis. So suppose you just take an example of a shaft. So that shaft is considered to be journal in case of journal bearing, and it takes load perpendicular to the axis of the shaft. Okay. So where what happens in case of thrust bearings, the load is acted along the axis of the shaft. So those kind of bearings are called thrust bearings. And Leonardo da Vinci, so 1450 to 1519, scientific examination of the topic of tribology began only in recent history. Beginning with Leonardo da Vinci, who in 1500 studied the problem of friction by examining the coefficient of friction, that is static friction, on an inclined plane. And also, Da Vinci determined the value of the friction coefficient, that is one fourth, and formulated the laws of dry friction. Anyhow, later days, Coulomb friction, all these things came into existence. So he worked more on dry friction, Leonardo da Vinci. And also, he studied friction on horizontal and inclined planes, as well as wear on slide bearings. And the results of these investigations were first and second friction laws. Modified the rolling bearing by almost entirely replacing the moving couple between the two parts with a mechanism with reduced rolling friction. And in the between the year 15 to in the century 15th to 16th century, the Renaissance took place, and this Renaissance marks the beginning of the tribology as a discrete field. A basic understanding of friction and wear was understood, and the new developments in lubricant took place. So 1663 to 1705 ammontons, as I discussed In the preamble itself, Momenton was a French physicist and a governor of Lille. He conducted research in the area of mixed friction and found that the friction force depends on the normal force, and that surface roughness must be regarded as a cause of friction. So he could find that the surface roughness also contributes to a lot into friction, because the smoother the surface, the friction is very less. So during the first class itself, I had demonstrated how the surface friction it becomes a boon for sometimes and bane for sometimes. Okay, so that was the study done by Amundtens. Then later in the year 1683 to 1744, John Theophilus Desegler's was a French natural philosopher, and he developed a tribology model to explain friction and attributed friction to the influence of cohesion and adhesion. And also, he found that the higher frictional force occurs on a better polished surfaces, and also showed that the two well polished lead bodies that are pressed firmly together could only be separated with a surprising large force. So, this was the finding of John Theophilus Desegles. Then Isaac Newton. So, a great physicist, scientist, you can, with respect to mechanical engineering, his contribution is a lot. 1687 is era, and Newton defined the term viscosity and adhesion theory. He postulated adhesion theory, the assumption that friction has a molecular mechanical causes, and he came about when Newton defined the material parameter of dynamic viscosity, and this definition is based on the idea of molecular mechanical cause for friction. So this is also an important aspect of tribology, because so nowadays the almost all problems are dealt with viscosity. So without viscosity, we cannot solve a problem. And we also found that the viscosity varies with temperature and the pressure. Okay. Then Leonard Howler, in the year 1707 to 1783, he studied friction on inclined planes and found that static friction is approximately twice that of the magnitude of sliding friction. So one more important finding. So Euler he studied friction on inclined surfaces and found that the static friction is approximately, not exactly, twice that of the magnitude of sliding friction. And he also introduced the friction coefficient, that is mu, that is exclusively used in tribology, coefficient of friction. Um, then Charles Coulomb theory. So Coulomb continued to that is in the between the year 1736 to 806. So Coulomb continued to develop the basic ideas of abundance in terms of surface roughness and mixed friction. And he also examined that the relationship between the necessary horizontal force and the weight percentage both are important terms in tribology. So horizontal force and weight percentage. Then according to Coulomb's model, the friction coefficient of a given surface does not depend on the load. That is, the friction force is proportional to weight. And furthermore, friction is independent of surface area, because it is only a function of the mean angle of incline of the roughness. So these were the findings of Coulomb between the year 1736 to 806. Then it goes to the year 1794. Philip Warren, and he from the Carmarthen, was an iron founder who invented the ball bearing in the year 1791. So this ball bearing is a kind of anti-friction bearing. Why it is anti-friction bearing? The contact surface between the ball and the race of the bearing is just a point. Okay. Whereas in case of roller bearing, it's a line contact. So that's what both the ball bearing and the roller bearings are called anti-friction bearings. Anti-friction. So the friction in these cases are very, very, very less compared to slider bearing, like journal bearing. So his invented that ball bearing in the year 1791, and you can see that the ball bearing in your cycle wheels also, the cycle wheels, even two wheelers. Okay, you have seen that no, just there is a bearing race, two race, inner race and outer race, and between that the balls are kept. Okay, and these balls it will be rolling as the wheel starts rotating. So, and it is patented in the year 1794, Philip Vaughan. And the 18th century, the mechanism of the rolling or anti-friction bearing was reinvented in the 18th century in England, and when an axial for horse carriages was fitted with a ball bearing ring in the semicircular partial grooves, which were distributed over this axle. Then, in the year 1750 to 1850, so 100-year span time. So after a long wait, advances in development of lubricants in tribology were finally achieved during the Industrial Revolution. See, bearing is one of the important component in any kind of machineries. Without bearing, you cannot design a machine. That's my view. Okay, it's hard to build a machine without the usage of bearing. That is the importance of bearing. So whenever there is a motion, whenever there is a rolling action, you need a bearing there itself. And industrial revolution, which took place between the 17th century, and it goes up to the middle of the 18th century. So this tribology was under the on the focus, and worldwide the inventions, the research work began on tribology, and it is continued till today. So these were the product of discoveries in fluid mechanics and viscous flow properties, as well as increasing the demand of industrial development brought with it for lubricants in greater volume and quality. And also, in the 17th century, when the industrial revolution took place, there was a rapid replacement of vegetable and animal oils with the mineral oils, because petroleum got extracted in a huge manner, and the byproducts of petrol were diesel, kerosene, so and so. And people started to manufacture or produce the lubricant out of that petroleum. And even nowadays, the almost the world market, if you see that lubricant major share is from the petroleum products only. Okay. So SAE 10, 20, 30, 40, 80, Society of Automotive Engineers specified oils, all are derived from petroleum product. And and almost all the vegetable and animal oils were replaced during that time, industrial revolution time. And the 1802 Cardinal patented a tapered roller bearing, tapered roller bearing. So line contact only, tapered one. And this bearing can withstand a great deal of stress both in radial and axial directions. In general, it is installed in pairs. Two bearings are positioned opposite to each other, as the bearing consists of two separate elements. And the inner ring with the roller elements and outer ring with that forms the bearing shell. That was a contribution of coordinate. In 1859, E.L. Drake, the first oil well is drilled in 1859. And in the 19th century, lubricating components experienced a breakthrough in the 19th century during the course of industrialization. See, industrialization means it is again the main source, the main power energy was the petroleum. So due to that only the world turned into a different direction. In most of the cases, the rolling elements are guided in retainer, so that keeps them a uniform distance from one another and prevents them from touching to each other. So like that, next is 18, 1850 to 1925. So the period from 1850 to 1925 is regarded as a time of technical progress. So the railways are the focal point of societal events, and the transition from solid lubrication to the liquid lubricant occurred in the lubrication of bearings and slideways. So 1925 and beyond, the actual age of tribology began after the First World War. High loads, speeds, and temperatures were accompanied by increasing stress. And after the Second World War, scientists examined that solid lubricant, molybdenum disulfide, an exceptional lubricant for exceptional conditions, the perfect product for space research. So solid lubricant example is just take an example of talc powder. So when you are playing a carom, so in order to facilitate the smooth movement of the pawns, so you put a talc powder on it. So that's again comes under that category. It's a lubricant. So 1966, the term tribology was mentioned for the first time. It was coined. Tribology, tri means tree. So friction, wear, lubrication. So these are all the terms, main terms associated with the word tribology. So it was coined in the year 1966, first time by Just Report, a study commissioned by the British government to investigate damage from the wear. And the report has since been referred to in connection with the friction wear and lubrication. So these are all the three important terms associated with tribology. And even in today's generation, the details of history of tribology are given by Dawson, and a few notable points are in the September 1964 Conference on Lubrication in Iron and Steel Works in Cardiff, UK, and the realization of considerable losses due to lack of knowledge related to friction of machine components. After this realization, the UK Minister of State for Science formed a committee to investigate the education, research, and need of industry related lubrication. So even today also, once in a year, the World Tribology Summit will be held in various countries. So in the year 2017, it was held in China. So that was a big event. And later onwards, I don't know which country it was took place. Anyhow, I will have that. I have that video. I will try to show it to you. After 1966, the word tribology has been used for basic mechanism governing interfacial behavior, basic theories, quantifying interfacial mechanisms, and solution to friction and wear problems. So this is the history of tribology. So normally this question is appearing in every semester question papers. So just go through that, and you cannot answer, you cannot tell the story of all these things. It is left to you how you brief up the examination. You can make a notes out of it. Anyhow, I have shared the notes regarding this. Just go on telling the findings of the scientist and the physicist over a period of time. Okay, with the video of International Tribology Summit, I will end up the today's session. Just play that now. History of tribology.
In China, friction, the dominator of nature and our civilization. Ancient China made an important contribution to the development of tribology, from the Swedish Hitler by Julie Wood in prehistoric times to Yellow Emperor's Vico creation in the ancient Chinese era. From lifting water by witness and folk in the Shang and Zhou dynasty to the spindle recorded in heavenly creations, Tiangong Taiwu. Human has been exploring the friction phenomenon for a long time. The use of the law of friction is one of the signs of human civilization. The scientific exploration of the rule of friction education is an important symbol in the development of modern science and technology. From Leonardo da Vinci's solid friction experiment to a budget friction formula, from Charles Augustine Coulomb's classical law of friction to John Theophilos de Saint-Pierre's molecular theory of friction, from Krajewski's molecular mechanical theory of friction to Frank Philip Belden and James D. Beaver's Newton theory of friction, from the automatic pressure test of Belgium power, the lubrication equation, and Osborne windows, the boundary lubrication model, the William B. Hardy, the lubrication state curve, the recharge through that, from the Celtic theory of rearranged root curves to the elastic hydrodynamic lubrication theory, the boundary center, the collaborative grouping, and 19,000 central. Review from the definition of technology from H. The study friction, where application has been matched to the fields of modern tribology, such as surface engineering, minor tribology, and lubrication. The development of these fields has played a significant role of modern industry. Through a wide experiments and quantitative research, more and more rules of tribology have been found and applied. Tribology has become an important force to develop and create the future. Tribology plays a more important role in this highly developed industrial civilization today. It is found that 30% of the primary energy is consumed by friction all over the world. 50% of the machine parts failure is due to wear. And more than 50% of viscous mechanical equipment accidents are originated in the lubrication failure, excessive wear. The continuous improvement of tribology is creating a more efficient, safer, and a greener home on Earth. In modern times, tribology is increasingly applied to various fields, from aerospace to transportation and bridge engineering, and to ocean dive and deep earth exploration. Almost all of the world's super engineering is partly contributed by the tribology. With the deepening of study, we find that there are more mysteries for us to explore and discover in the tribology world, particularly nanotribology, biotribology, green lubrication, smarter lubrication, and super lubricity have brought out new opportunities for the development for tribology. We are pleasantly surprised, excited, moved by every exploration of new areas. We know that each step forward of the tribology will bring more efficient production and a better life for human beings. We carry the mission to forge ahead and never stop to explore. Over the past 4 years, a number of scientists who have made outstanding contributions to the tribology has deceased. We will never forget that their persistence and devotion make tribology become the backbone influencing the world as an important display. We are pleased to witness that more and more outstanding scientists start a dedication to the study of tribology and participate in it. Which makes tribology versatile and appreciated for its visits the World Tribology Congress in 2017. Welcome to Beijing.
Okay, that was a short video on Tribology Congress that was held in China in the year 2017. So it will be conducted once in 2-3 years, World Tribology Congress. Okay, so with this I will end my session. So tomorrow we'll discuss with another topic. Okay, thank you one and all.